Thanks to its non-habitual resident or NHR tax scheme, Portugal has become an increasingly attractive option for everyone from business owners to investors to move for fun in the sun in Europe and low tax rates. But there are a lot of misconceptions, and today I'm going to share some of the most common ones with you. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson. I'm the author of this book, available on Amazon, and the founder of Nomad Capitalist, where we help 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally go where you're treated best. More at nomadcapitalist.com. Now let's talk about Portugal's non-habitual resident tax regime. It's called the NHR, and Portugal started this back in 2009 as a way to get people to come and pay a dramatically reduced rate, or potentially even, especially at that time, zero on a lot of types of foreign income. Portugal is a pretty small country in Europe, unlike its neighbor Spain, where the culture among the government types is, hey, we're Spain, everyone's coming here, why should we be that aggressive in terms of attracting people? Portugal, I think even if the politicians would like to be more aggressive in terms of tax, realizes we need to bring people to our country, and along with the golden visa, they introduced this NHR at a similar point in time. So let's go through some misconceptions though, because I think a lot of people think that they simply go to Portugal and it's zero tax and it's really easy. And quite frankly, as we've said before, nothing in Europe is really easy. Everything in Europe is going to require more planning. Everything in Europe is going to be a bit more expensive. This is not just as easy as moving to a zero tax country or a territorial tax country or some other type of low tax or tax friendly country. You need a bit more planning. And that starts with the fact, misconception number one, people sometimes assume that registration for this NHR status is automatic, and that is false. You need to get access to the website from the tax authority. You need to get a tax ID number. You need to register for NHR. You cannot just go there and assume, hey, they'll take care of it. You need to go, state your intentions, file for the NHR status. You can do that once you get there. And that is the first misconception. Just thinking, hey, Portugal has this tax regime, it's going to apply to me, I don't need to do anything. You actually do need to do something. After you've registered, after you've signed up, after you've gotten the status, misconception number two comes in, that is, I don't need to file a tax return. You will need to, generally by June 30th of every year, actually file a tax return. Now, you may not owe a lot. You may not in some cases even owe anything, but you do need to file a tax return. And so this is not some fly-by-night kind of tax residence program. You actually need to go through the same procedures. So if you're looking to go to a place where, at Nomad Capitalist Live, for example, we had a speaker talking about how, hey, I love my life. I'm out of the US system. Now I get to live in these zero tax countries. I don't even have the paperwork. You know, Europe is not going to be a place where you're going to go and have a totally paperwork-free life. So you could have pretty good rates, but you are going to have to take action in terms of registering and then in terms of filing a tax return. Now, let's go to the next misconception. You can pay zero tax. Now, while Portugal is pretty good for crypto traders, that's not even entirely related to the NHR. Cryptocurrency is very friendly right now in Portugal, but let's say you're running a business. Let's say you're making investments. Let's say you have a pension. Let's say you have income from whatever different source. People think, oh, again, NHR, zero tax, very easy to deal with. That is simply not true. What most people are going to do is they're going to pay a relatively low rate of tax. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're a freelancer, you're going to have to set up a company somewhere, and it's not going to be allowed to be just anywhere. You're going to have a list of places where you can set up your company. You're going to have certain procedures and policies in place. Or, if you're a freelancer, if you have a job, there's going to be certain things you have to do. My kind of layman interpretation or layman explanation is this is an opportunity for someone who's paying a relatively high rate of tax who wants to come and pay less tax. If you're already used to living in the Cayman Islands or in Dubai or in Vanuatu or Monaco, this is going to be a bit more work, and most people aren't going to pay zero. It's simply not set up that way. Now, you may not pay anything to Portugal, but in order to do that, you may end up paying tax somewhere else. And so this is where, especially for business owners, entrepreneurs, you're going to have kind of a complicated tax setup of different jurisdictions, and you're going to need to have some professional advice for that. So it's not just as simple as zero tax, goodbye, leave me alone. You're definitely going to be, in most cases, paying something. The next misconception is that the Portugal NHR is easy for Americans. Now, I've often said everything's easy and nothing's easy. It can be worked through, but when you are a U.S. citizen, you have tax obligations in the United States. As we've said many times, you can move overseas, you can go where you're treated best, you can dramatically reduce the rate of tax on your business. But one of the things that comes into play are things like GILTI in the United States. There are some taxes that you have to pay in the US if your business earns a healthy amount of money. And so how does that play in with Portugal? It's not the end of the world, but there is going to be some back and forth between the US and Portugal. Not everything lines up perfectly. You're going to have to deal with what you're paying in Portugal in the US and vice versa. So, it's a lot easier for someone who's moving within the EU, for example, to no longer be a taxpayer in Germany or Ireland or wherever else and simply move to Portugal. Or, to leave Colombia or, whatever other country you live in and move and just cut all your tax ties with your home country by following the procedures required by that country. If you're an American, up until the day that you actually expatriate and give up your US passport, you're going to be in the hook. And the rules have become more complicated in recent years, especially if you're going to structure your business through a US LLC. Often not going to work, so you're going to want to just in general have a more robust foreign structure for doing that, no matter what you do in most cases. But if your business is structured offshore, that's going to want to be corrected. If your business is structured, mid-shore, let's call it, that satisfies Portugal. There's just going to be things that you need to work out as you're an American. I don't want to give tax advice or speak to some specific situation and someone does the wrong thing. But just understand, again, Europe is more work, and if you're also a U.S. citizen, you're always filing those U.S. tax returns. There is a tax treaty. It makes life a little bit easier, but you're going to have more difficulty, more work, and I've seen cases where it's just a lot of work to get things to work cleanly together. The next misconception is that Portugal NHR is some kind of residence permit, and so this is the same kind of thing we hear when we've talked over the years about Estonia's e-residence program, which is basically just a digital ID that you can theoretically use to open bank accounts. It's not immigration status at all. You're not working towards citizenship. You can't live in Estonia. The same thing happens here. Now, generally what you'll do is you will be an NHR. You'll have the NHR status. You will be a taxpayer in Portugal, what have you, and you will have an immigration status in Portugal. So you will get one of the visas. You'll get the golden visa. You will have an immigration status, and then you'll spend the time. You'll have the requisite things to qualify for the program. You'll get an apartment, whatever, and you'll have the immigration part. What I think confuses people is you have tax residence, you have tax exemptions, exclusions, what have you. You have your immigration residence, and then you have citizenship. Another misconception is that this is somehow Portuguese citizenship. So people are confusing. What is your residence? What is your citizenship? What is your tax status? These are all different things. And so this is not citizenship. The immigration that you may have as part of the package that you're pairing with NHR may lead to citizenship, and people do move to Portugal. You can work towards getting Portuguese citizenship if you're willing to learn some of the language, if you're willing to spend at least a little bit of time there with the golden visa, something like that. But this is not citizenship. You're not going to get a Portuguese passport because you register as NHR. You may get the ability to tell some other country, hey, leave me alone because now I'm paying tax in Portugal, even if that tax isn't very much or even anything at all, but it is not Portuguese citizenship. And the last misconception is that you can't be a Portuguese citizen and qualify for this. What the rules basically say is you have to have been gone for 5 years. Your center of life, your tax residence needs to have been in a different country for the last 5 years. And so once you get in, you have then 10 years. So this is not a permanent system, right? That's maybe another misconception, is that this is something that lasts forever. You do get 10 years. And you can do that as long as you've been gone from the country. And so if you meet that criteria, it doesn't really matter what your citizenship is, you can apply for the NHR. So there's an overview of a number of misconceptions people have about Portugal's NHR tax regime. Listen, if you're used to paying a decent up to relatively high rate of tax, this is probably going to be a great system. And if you're coming from a high tax country like the US, and this is your first stop, you may notice a few more requirements in terms of audits for your company than you would in, let's say, the US and an LLC. But by and large, you're used to doing paperwork, you're used to paying taxes. Again, this could be a relative soft landing for you to come into. But if you've been in full-blown nomad capitalist mode for a long time and you've been paying 0 or 1% and you've been doing scant amounts of paperwork, you're going to find this a bit more laborious. So people ask, Andrew, how do I get the most out of Nomad Capitalist? How do I begin my Nomad Capitalist journey? The first thing people do is they start right where you're at. They watch YouTube, they listen to podcasts, they read articles at nomadcapitalist.com. We've spent years creating thousands of pieces of free content so that you can get the vibe from someone who's actually done this, from someone who's actually been in your shoes. What they'll do next, they'll get a copy of the book. You can find it on Amazon. It costs a few bucks, and while it's not going to give you all the secrets, it's going to, again, give you more of the vibe. You're going to learn a lot of the things that I've learned. You're going to learn some strategies you can employ, and you're going to get a lot further in your journey. From there, if you are the 7 or 8 figure entrepreneur investor, you can go to nomadcapitalist.com. You can click Become a Client. We're pretty busy these days, but we have availability to help a limited number of people who want to create a holistic plan, something that I think is so important. So if you want to do that, go to nomadcapitalist.com, click Become a Client, learn more about how it works and how we can help you.